It's 8 o'clock. This is the UK Tonight. Coming up, the Prime Minister brings forward plans to increase UK defence spending amid questions over Donald Trump's commitment to Europe and Sir Keir Starmer's visit to the White House on Thursday. He says the UK will spend 2.5% of GDP on defence within the next 2 years, and the foreign aid budget will be cut to pay for it. The Prime Minister says it's a generational response to a generational challenge. Tonight, we'll discuss what the new spending plans mean and what the cut to the aid budget means for the UK's place in the world. Also ahead tonight, a clampdown on cuckooing. This is when criminals move into a vulnerable person's home without permission and use it for their own ends. This is a growing problem, with the victims hidden. Plus, energy prices going up by more than expected. We'll find out why and what it means for you. Plus, a court is shown the moment that thieves stole a gold toilet worth almost £5 million from Blenheim Palace. Well, that's come and much more on the UK Tonight. We have to fight for peace through the action that we take. Those are words of Sir Keir Starmer tonight after he slashed foreign aid spending to increase the UK's defence budget. The Prime Minister said the UK will spend 2.5% of GDP on defence by 2027, and he admitted events of the last few weeks had accelerated his thinking on spending amid Russian aggression and questions over Donald Trump's commitment to European security. It's news that will be welcomed by President Trump, who Sir Keir will visit in Washington on Thursday. But what does the cut to the aid budget say about the UK's place on the global stage? We'll be discussing that in just a moment. But first, here's our political editor, Beth Rigby.
Our nation on a war footing, facing the reality of a changing world, and in these tense times for Europe and the UK, the Prime Minister now taking a decisive step.
Prime Minister.
Coming to the Commons to announce the biggest sustained hike in UK defence spending in decades.
We must change our national security posture because a generational challenge requires a generational response.
As the US calls on Europe, Keir Starmer stepping up.
This government will begin the biggest sustained increase in defence spending since the end of the Cold War. We will deliver our commitment to spend 2.5% of GDP on defence, but we will bring it forward so we reach that level in 2027.
The government says this amounts to an extra £13.4 billion a year, but this just the start.
Subject to economic and fiscal conditions and aligned with our strategic and operational needs, we will also set a clear ambition for defence spending to rise to 3% of GDP in the next Parliament.
That comes at a cost, the Prime Minister cutting the overseas aid budget to pay for defence.
It can only be funded through hard choices. I want to be clear to the House. That is not an announcement I am happy to make.
Can be better not.
But his opposite number liked what she heard.
I welcome his announcement on repurposing money from the overseas development budget. That is absolutely right. And I look forward to him taking up my other suggestion of looking at what we can do on welfare.
And while the Commons was united as ever over support for Ukraine, MPs divided over the Prime Minister's decision to take aim at aid.
Whilst we support increasing defence spending, we cannot support the populist playbook of cutting foreign aid.
Surely this too is a massive strategic and moral mistake.
After the Commons, the Prime Minister to a press conference in Downing Street. For months you've refused to give a time frame of when you'd hit spending 2.5% of GDP on defence, and now you've accelerated that. Isn't the simple reality that a Trump White House has now bounced you into that acceleration and that decision? And you say this is a generational moment, you reference the Cold War, you sound like a Prime Minister on a war footing. Should viewers be alarmed at how significant this moment is?
But this is a significant moment. I think in our heart of hearts, we've all known that this decision has been coming for 3 years, since the beginning of the conflict in Ukraine. The last few weeks have accelerated my thinking on when we needed to make this announcement.
This has been a massive moment, a once-in-a-generation moment, because Keir Starmer has been forced to acknowledge that the US under Donald Trump is no longer the reliable partner that the UK and Europe have counted on for decades. So what we are seeing is something more than just talk about defence spending, as crucial as it is. This is much bigger. It's about a changing world order that our Prime Minister simply cannot ignore. Number 10's made its move. Now we wait to see whether the huge commitment from the PM here will find favour in Washington on Thursday when it comes to talking Donald Trump into a more favourable peace deal for Ukraine. Beth Rigby, Sky News, Westminster.
Well, let's explore the impact of today's announcement. Tonight, I'm joined by Romilly Greenhill, Chief Executive of the Bond International Development Network, representing the humanitarian sector in tonight's discussion, and alongside Romilly, Malcolm Chambers, Deputy Director General of RUSI, the Royal United Services Institute, the Defence and Security think tank. But thank you both for joining us on the programme this evening. Malcolm, I'll come to you first, if I may. It was seen as an unexpected move by Sir Keir Starmer today, but was it an overdue and indeed a necessary one, in your opinion?
I think it was a necessary move, and I think the big driver for this change is the approach of the new American administration. After all, Russia invaded Ukraine 3 years ago. That war grinds on with no prospect of it ending soon. What has changed in the last couple of months is we now have an American administration with a radically different approach. We now have a US at the United Nations Security Council, which is refusing to ally with the UK and other European countries in recognising the reality that Russia is the aggressor in Ukraine. And it's an American administration that clearly wants to pivot its military effort away from Europe to elsewhere. And faced with that, the UK, along with virtually all its European allies, knows that it has to take a much greater responsibility for its own defence, not only in relation to helping Ukraine, but more broadly against the threat of Russia. Because, you know, Russia, in military terms, is no match for a united NATO, but it is a match, a serious threat if NATO is divided. And we have the prospect that Russia may believe that NATO is not as united as it has been for very many years. So faced with all that, I think the UK and other European countries do have to do more in defence and do it pretty quickly.
Yeah, taking on more responsibility means more money. That's got to be funded somehow. And Romilly Greenhill, you know, it's coming from the aid budget. 4 years ago, the Prime Minister, then the opposition leader, said that foreign aid saves lives and is instrumental in soft diplomacy. In fact, the Foreign Secretary just 2 weeks ago criticised Donald Trump's decision to freeze US aid, saying development remains a very important soft power tool. And he's worried without it, he would be very worried China and others would step into that gap. What's your reaction to these developments today?
Well, I think today's decision is absolutely, it's the wrong thing to do, and quite frankly, it's the stupid thing to do in the current context. It's the wrong thing to do because it's going to mean children out of school, it's going to mean women no longer having access to family planning, it's going to mean children, babies not getting life-saving vaccinations. So it's absolutely morally the wrong thing to do, that some of the most poorest and most vulnerable people in the world are really footing the bill for this defence spending. But also, quite honestly, it's a stupid thing to do because actually it will undermine our security in the long run. The UK aid plays an absolutely key role in supporting peace building, conflict prevention, all of the things like educating girls, like providing jobs for young people that can prevent conflict in the long run. So this will actually undermine our long-term security interests rather than help them.
Yeah, Romilly, there will be people watching tonight that say the long run is all very well and good, but in the short term, How can the UK keep vulnerable people around the world safe if it can't keep itself safe first and foremost?
Well, we need to do both, but these things go together. I mean, just look at the pandemic. We had a massive pandemic 3 or 4 years ago. Spending money internationally can actually help our health security, can prevent future pandemics, it can prevent conflicts. It helps our prosperity as well. So as I say, I'm not against us spending more money on defence, but we need to support defence, we need to support diplomacy, and we need to support development. All of those three things absolutely have to go together, because that is in the long-term interests of the UK, and in fact the short-term interests, to your point.
Yeah, I mean, Malcolm, is this a popular move, increasing defence spending? It seems to be widely agreed that it needs to be done, given the current climate. You know, the Prime Minister talking about, you know, this is a generational shift. The world is looking different. America is slowly turning away from Europe, and Europe has to look after itself. But the issue is, how is this funded? Could the money have come from elsewhere? Because, again, domestically, I'm not sure how it would have played with UK voters for it to come from anywhere else.
You know, increasing the defence budget would not be easy at any time in those respects, but it's a particularly hard moment right now because we are, as a nation, running a big budget deficit. We're knocking right up against Rachel Reeves' fiscal rules, and we're facing the prospect of quite significant cuts in domestic departments, and moreover, public resistance to further tax increases is very, very high. So in the short term, I think the government has decided that the aid budget is the least painful cut to make. But I mean, I think Romilly is absolutely right in terms of the role of the aid budget in the UK's international position. Quite a lot of the support we give to Ukraine, it takes a form of economic assistance, and when the British public sees famine and conflict in places like Sudan, they rightly expect the UK government to make a contribution to that. I think it's also true that the prospect of increasing to 3% of GDP in the next Parliament, that increase cannot be funded from the aid budget because there's not enough of the aid budget left to finance it. So I think this increases the likelihood that at the next general election, all the parties will have to ask some really difficult questions as to whether they're prepared to make some more radical changes, either in other areas of government spending or in the level of taxation, because the pressure from the defence budget on everything else is going to increase.
Yeah, I mean, you know, there's... Romilly, please do come in.
I wanted to come in because, you know, let's think about the cause of this defence spending increase is around the conflict in Russia, between Russia and Ukraine. Now, we have a lot of money sitting here in terms of Russian frozen assets in the UK. For example, we have 2.3 billion from the sale of the Chelsea Football Club. Why are we not using some of that money? You know, our argument has been using that money to support development. We can think about, you know, wealth taxes, we can think about polluter pay taxes. There's all sorts of ways that we can raise additional resources so that the UK can play the role it needs to play on the world stage without having necessarily
Malcolm, why can't the government raid those kind of funds? Why is it going after, you know, the aid budget?
You know, I'm not an expert in all those things which Romilly mentioned.
Is it because it's not as easy?
But the things are usually not as easy as they seem if you're talking about the magnitude of sums we're talking about. And if you're talking about rate going up from 2.3 of GDP to 3% of GDP, that's an awful lot of money. It's tens of billions a year. It's not the sort of thing which I think most of those suggestions would raise. But of course, the government should look at all those suggestions. The bottom line is that if we want to maintain a good national health service, which is taking up ever greater resources, and we want to maintain all the other public services we've got, and we want to reverse the long-term decline there has been in defence spending as a proportion of GDP, then we're probably going to have to ask the British public to spend a little bit more on taxation to maintain that broad range of services and have a respectable aid budget as well.
I think it was the Institute of Fiscal Studies today that says the world has changed. The one question is whether the government's pre-existing promises on tax and spend might need to change as well in line with the defence budget. going up, potentially going up further in the future, because, you know, who knows where we may be in a few years' time, particularly with America seemingly withdrawing from Europe. Romilly, this announcement from Sir Keir Starmer does come hot on the heels of the American government's decision to freeze US aid. What is the concern here about this setting a precedent for other countries to follow suit?
Yeah, and that absolutely is a big concern. Unfortunately, the last time the UK cut the aid budget back in the pandemic, you know, we saw other countries following suit, and that's something that's really concerning to us. And in fact, on the US side, we're already seeing massive impacts in terms of, you know, health centres, people no longer being able to access family planning, things like HIV/AIDS medication no longer being available to people. So this UK decision is really adding insult to injury, in the sense of what we would have liked to see is the UK really stepping up and saying we're going to work with others to fill some of those gaps, to protect our interests and the interests of the poor and marginalised people around the world. And instead, I think we're really seeing a race to the bottom. And to go back to your earlier point, you know, this current government was very critical when they were in opposition of the former government for making those cuts a few years ago. They really called them out, and rightly so, in our opinion. You know, they had manifesto commitments around rebuilding trust, Britain being back on the world stage.
But a lot can happen in 4 years. I mean, look at what's happened in the last 4 months with the new Trump administration, his second term.
Well, the election was only last summer, and these are really key manifesto commitments that this government made to, you know, to be back on the world stage, to rebuild trust, to rebuild our global reputation. You said at the beginning that the foreign secretaries talked about soft power and how we're seen around the world. That is also really critical. This is why we're saying defence, diplomacy and development are all really important, because actually how we are seen by other countries in the world, that really matters. And we've done a massive own goal today by making this cut. It will be noticed. The last cuts were noticed around the world, and this one will be too. And that's why we're so deeply disappointed.
Yeah, some people would say, you know, how we're seen around the world, you know, does that matter at the moment? A lot of people are saying, you know, it's how the UK is seen by America at this point in time when it comes to these kind of decisions. Romilly, Greenhill, really good to hear from you. Thank you. Chief Executive there of Bond International Development Network, and Malcolm Chambers as well, Deputy Director General of Malcolm Sharman, I beg your pardon, from the Royal United Services Institute. Thank you for joining us on the programme tonight.
Thank you.
A neighbour has been telling Sky News of their shock after a man has admitted killing his mother and both his siblings in what the Home Secretary described as the most appalling crime. 19-year-old Nicholas Prosper pleaded guilty to the murders of Juliana Falcon, Giselle Prosper and Carl Prosper at Luton Crown Court yesterday. Police saying he was also plotting a shooting at his former primary school. Our national correspondent Tom Parmenter reports now from Luton.
It was here, on the 8th floor of their tower block, that Nicholas Prosper killed his mother and 2 siblings. David lives in the flat above and told us what he knew of his neighbours.
They were a very nice family, like very calm. You'd see the mum, like most mornings go and like exercise with their bikes. We spoke here and there, but he didn't give off a vibe to me that there was like something maybe wrong with him.
In the early hours of the 13th of September last year, Prosper shot dead his mum, Juliana, his 16-year-old brother, Kyle, and his 13-year-old sister, Giselle. David's family heard the shooting.
They said the floor was shaking and that they heard banging and screaming. It just goes to show that you never know anyone's character, really, no matter how close you are to them. Like, everyone's really just confused, like how a son can do that to his own family.
He had a troubling online life. And it has now emerged that after attacking his family, Nicholas Prosper was set to target his old primary school, but was arrested before he could.
This is another case where a young man has become fixated on violence with horrendous consequences. The Home Secretary has said that this obsession with school massacres and what young people are looking at online both raise really serious issues that the UK authorities are addressing.
The police presence at his former primary school has been reassuring for parents who were disturbed by news of his planned attack here.
I went to this school and my kids go here. My youngest one's here, so it's scary to think that it's happened, but I'm so glad the police caught it when they did.
I didn't even want to imagine it if it would have happened. I didn't want to imagine that. I was really worried. It's stuff we expect from the States, not here, so it's quite scary.
Having to sit your 11-year-old down and talk about somebody having a shotgun, and that actually sticks in the brain, and that can actually shape their life in one way or the other. But however, we're able to convince them and reassure them that don't worry, we'll be fine.
By admitting his crimes, Nicholas Prosper won't now stand trial. He will be held on remand until he's sentenced next Wednesday. Tom Parmenter, Sky News, Luton.
Still to come here on the UK Tonight, we'll be taking a look at the new police and crime bill as the government promises to take back control of town centres. Also coming up, care providers protest in Westminster today over the threat of rising costs and higher taxes. And gone in a flush, police release CCTV of the moment thieves stole a golden toilet from Blenheim Palace.
Over there, to your left. There have been airstrikes every day. Hezbollah are very sensitive about us showing any pictures, and we're being hurried away right now. It felt akin to riding into some sort of Armageddon. Many other areas have been hit badly. There are shells coming in every few minutes. Hear that whistle and that crunch? We know that they're coming from the south of the city, where there's a column of Russian armoury. I'm Alex Crawford, and I'm Sky's special correspondent based in Istanbul. It's trying to hit us. That's it. It got us then. There's a lot of action going on. A lot of hits still. We were the first journalists and the only outsiders to reach the site of the attack several weeks after it happened.
We found from the missile.
It's very difficult to see what around here could be conceived of as a legitimate military target. Only about half a mile from the Turkish coast, a boat seriously overcrowded. This is one of the most severe viruses in the world. Clearly not had very much to eat at all, a lot of them extremely thin and very frail. Look at that sheet of flames, and that has happened within minutes, and now it's coming from both sides, and it's moving this way.
The world's largest falls now down to a trickle in places.
I can't imagine how much plastic is lying at the bottom of this huge lake. Oh! Getting up close and personal with a rhino.
This is what makes the job so fantastic.
I saw police being forceful, pushing young men and women to the ground as they made almost 100 arrests. Will the cold affect your voters?
Well, we have a lot of tremendous support.
Free, wherever you get your news. The people here know that worse storms may well be on their way. I'm Martha Kellner, and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Los Angeles.
The Home Secretary has promised to take back control of town centres after announcing new powers for police to tackle theft, street crime and antisocial behaviour. Officers will no longer need a warrant to enter premises where stolen items have been electronically located. But there are questions over whether police have the funding to actually carry out these plans. Sky's Sadia Chowdhury has more.
Watch this video of police stopping an e-bike rider for a second time. He's been dangerously riding down a pavement. The first time they stopped him, officers could only issue a warning, so they've had to encounter him a second time in order to seize the bike and make an arrest.
What's your name?
In 2023, an e-bike rider on a pavement crashed into Jim Blackwood. He died of his injuries.
He was pretty healthy. I fully expected him to get to 100, actually. So Mum and Dad, they were married, they were together for 72 years when this happened. Sorry. Dad passed away 4 days after their 69th anniversary. It's been very difficult.
Christine wants tougher laws and punishments for people who ride e-bikes.
Stop where you are!
And new powers for police will go some way to that. They'll now be allowed to seize vehicles like e-bikes the first time they're stopped.
It's one of many measures included in the Crime and Policing Bill, which targets antisocial behaviour with a particular focus on so-called lower-level offences. It's being described as one of the biggest legislative updates to crime and policing in decades.
Here are some of the new measures. Drink spiking is set to become a specific offence. So is assaulting a shop worker. Police hunting stolen phones and other devices that are electronically geotagged no longer need warrants to search properties. And cuckooing, which is where criminals use a vulnerable person's house as a base for their crimes, that's being outlawed. The government says the new powers can help police act quicker.
There's real links between all kinds of the different crimes and antisocial behaviour that we see in our communities. This government is determined not just to put more neighbourhood police back on the beat, but also to give them stronger powers that they need to crack down on this really damaging antisocial behaviour.
The Metropolitan Police Federation says the bill creates unrealistic objectives.
It seems a little pointless introducing new legislation when you don't have the means to implement it. And we simply do not have enough police officers. We do not have enough police officers that are trained.
The Crime and Policing Bill has entered Parliament on its way to becoming the law. Sadia Chowdhury, Sky News.
As part of the new Crime and Policing Bill, cuckooing is also going to be made a specific criminal offence. That might be a new term for you, but it's a growing problem here in the UK. It's when the home of a vulnerable person is taken over without consent for illegal activities, such as drug dealing. Well, policy research and advocacy lead at Justice and Care, Louise Gleich, joins me in the studio now to tell us more about this. Louise, hello.
Hello.
It was a relatively new term to me, I must admit, when I heard it earlier this week. And just having a look at local newspapers online, they're reporting it. Cases in Bath, Hertfordshire, Bolton, Peterborough. This is happening up and down the UK, but because it's happening behind closed doors, it's not being talked about widely.
Absolutely. I mean, we did some polling a few years ago, and the people that we asked in that polling, 1 in 8 of them said that they'd seen signs of cuckooing in their community. So it really is happening absolutely all amongst us. But by its very nature, it's happening in someone's home, behind closed doors. Often it might be the neighbours who are the first to spot something. They see maybe antisocial behaviour or lots of people coming and going from a property, or somebody who they have never seen before starts coming around a lot to their neighbour's home, and they begin to suspect, you know, who is that person and what's happening to their neighbour inside.
Is there a typical victim? It does seem to centre on vulnerable people, people who perhaps are at a disadvantage and don't realise it's happening to them until it's too late, even if they realise it's happening at all.
Exactly. I don't think there's any typical victim. And actually a police officer I spoke to once said, we need to remember it could happen to any of us. All it takes is one thing to go wrong in your life that makes you vulnerable, that could put you at risk. But it is that vulnerability that the criminals prey on. So that could be an elderly person, someone who is lonely, who is susceptible to someone befriending them, or somebody with learning disabilities, or maybe mental health issues who isn't able to sort of unpick what's happening to them. But then there are other people, we spoke to charities working with care leavers who said that some of the young people that they work with are also vulnerable to cuckooing. So that can be that real spread from people who are really young adults to elderly people to people in between with all different kinds of vulnerabilities.
Yeah. Given the nature of it, we perhaps may never know the true scale of what's happening across the UK. But in terms of police recognising it and dealing with it, what have you made of these new announcements about making it a specific criminal offence?
We're delighted. We've been calling for it to be a criminal offence for about the last 3 years since we first did research on this in 2021. And that research was sparked by police officers and our frontline workers coming to us in the research team and saying, we're experiencing this, we're seeing this cuckooing happening, but there don't seem to be the right criminal offences there to charge. The problem is, at the moment, police are stuck with using things like drugs crimes or prostitution law or the other offences, and none of those really reflects the harm done to the person whose home has been taken over, who's been threatened, who's been manipulated and coerced, and maybe been in fear for their life in their own home. So this is a really great step forward.
As ever, it's a broad outline. We wait for the specific detail, but
Absolutely.
what do you think you need to see from the government to have effective tools to tackle this?
Yeah, so I took a really quick look this afternoon as the bill was published, but we'll be scrutinising it really closely in the coming days and as it goes through Parliament. We need to make sure the offence gives police the tools they need. Yep. We need to make sure that that isn't just to address the people taking over the home, but the people who are behind them, those who are directing or orchestrating the whole approach. We also need to make sure the offence is able to recognise that victims are manipulated and groomed. So it might seem on the surface that they've given consent to someone to come into their home, but actually what's happening underneath is they're just too frightened to say, no, I don't want you to be doing this in my home. So we need to make sure that the offence can deal with that as well.
It's a very nuanced crime, isn't it? And will involve a great deal of detail and training, presumably, for police officers. And just finally, if somebody does suspect that they know of a case of cuckooing, it's a little bit like modern slavery in terms of we're told to look out for the signs, and people sometimes feel a bit frightened to speak up because they don't quite know what they're dealing with or what they're observing. What would be your advice?
Absolutely, to contact the police and say that you're worried about your neighbour. If you're living in a housing association property, you could contact the landlord, the housing association. Many housing associations now are alert to this happening in their properties. You can contact the council. The council can also intervene. And actually, from my point of view, this is a type of modern slavery. So you can also contact the National Modern Slavery and Exploitation Helpline, and they will advise. If
in doubt, make that call. OK, Louise Gleich, Policy Research and Advocacy Lead at Justice and Care. Thank you for your time tonight. Thank you. Let's bring you some breaking news now from Ukraine. And a government source in Kyiv has told Sky News that Ukraine has agreed terms with the United States on a crucial minerals deal. Now, we understand that this new deal could unlock a partnership between Kyiv and Donald Trump's White House after weeks of increasingly tense exchanges. The source says there is a plan for the document to be signed very soon, possibly at a face-to-face meeting between President Zelensky and President Trump. President Trump saying earlier today that he expects to meet Zelensky this week, potentially next. We'll have more information on that breaking news for you as soon as we get it. Now, care providers today took to the streets of Westminster to warn the government that their industry is at breaking point. Research suggesting the changes to national insurance and the minimum wage will cost the sector an extra £2.8 billion a year, money that providers say they simply don't have. Our people and political correspondent Nick Martin has this report.
Around 3,000 social care workers marched on Westminster. Their message, they are at breaking point. A rise in national insurance contributions combined with an increase in the national minimum wage has led to warnings that some care providers simply won't survive this year.
Social care has been under huge pressure for decades, we all know that. So any added burden could be, to invoke a cliche, something that breaks the camel's back.
We're in this because we care, and you can't do this anymore. It's broken.
It is completely unprecedented. Local authorities tell us they don't have the money. Government tells us that they've given it to the local authorities. We're not playing piggy in the middle anymore. Somebody's lying.
We've been married 59 years in March.
Hello.
This is the kind of care campaigners say is at risk. Sheila was diagnosed with Alzheimer's in 2018.
You had enough? Yeah. Yeah?
And if carers don't come in to help her, husband Paul says she'd have to go into a home.
I think they're amazing.
I was going to say the prospect of being split up. Take me through how that would feel.
It would be very difficult after such a long time together. You can't imagine yourself being on your own and visiting a nursing home every day, or maybe not every day, because every day she wouldn't know me.
According to the Nuffield Trust, the rise in national insurance will cost adult social care an extra £900 million a year. Add in the rise to the national minimum wage and those additional costs rise to an estimated £2.8 billion.
So this is our domain, this is Applewood Support.
Jane Jones runs the company that provides care to Sheila and Paul. She's been in the industry for decades.
When you first heard the Chancellor say she was increasing national insurance contributions for employers, what was your first reaction?
I felt sick, physically sick. It worked out to be about £6,000 a month extra that I would need to find. We've got rid of 2 personnel in the office because we just can't afford it. It's soul destroying.
You know, the whole reasoning behind the Chancellor's budget was to encourage economic growth. It's her #1 thing. But from what you're saying, it appears that it's had the opposite effect.
It's the complete opposite effect. It's an attack on our growth because we can't grow. We can't employ any more staff because we can't afford the NI. We cannot increase our costs like the supermarket can. We are limited to what the government councils can pay us. So if they can't pay us the right amount of money, we're just going to go close our doors. I'm sure that's going to happen in come April.
The social care sector has been in crisis mode probably for the last 30 years, and successive governments have failed to push through the kinds of reforms that could solve this crisis. And it is unusual to see carers and care providers protest on the streets like this. They say it's a sign of just how desperate things have become. Campaigners say the sums no longer add up as social care lurches from crisis to crisis. Nick Martin, Sky News, Westminster.
Still to come on the UK tonight, energy bills set to rise again. We'll take a look at what it means for you and why more than 1,000 musicians have released a silent album. Now, energy bills are going up again in April by around £111 a year for the average household. The energy regulator, Ofgem, is increasing the price cap by 6.4%, which they say is because of rising wholesale costs. This hike will hit people's finances at the same time that water and council tax bills are going up. Our business and economics correspondent, Gurpreet Narwan, has this report.
It's been a dicey few years for British households. The cost of living crisis ate into household budgets, and it doesn't feel like it's over yet, not with energy bills on the up again. Residents in this part of West London are feeling the heat.
There's a lot of people here in the winter, and it's obviously, a time where it's a difficult time for everyone with the energy crisis.
The bills go up, the utilities go up, but we all struggle, and they struggle even more.
I come so that I can get a good meal for £3. I can sit in a warm place and a pleasant place.
People do come as a source of escaping increasing energy demands and bills being, increasing in that way.
Energy bills are still higher than they were before the pandemic. And now Ofgem, the energy regulator, has raised the cap again after a cold winter in Europe depleted gas reserves. It means come April, the average household will be paying an extra £111 a year, taking their annual bill to £1,849. Analysts say it could fall again this summer to £1,756, but that's still £18 above the current level. And as prices have risen, so too has household energy debt, doubling to £3.8 billion since the Ukraine war began.
Energy is just one part of the equation. People here are juggling other bills too. Water, food, council tax, they're all adding up. It means the costs are mounting, but not everyone's wages are keeping up.
The government, which earlier this year withdrew the winter fuel payment from pensioners, says it's listening.
We're going to take action by putting forward proposals for an extra 2.7 million families to get £150 off bills next winter as part of the Warm Homes discount. And we're acting to bring down bills for everyone with our mission for clean, homegrown power that we control. Needs something, doesn't it?
That could work, but it will take reforms, money and, crucially, time before it pays dividends. And after the turmoil of the past few years, people are hungry for change now. Gurpreet Narwan, Sky News.
Some interesting picture to bring you next. CCTV footage which shows thieves stealing a gold toilet. Yes, that's right, a gold toilet from Blenheim Palace. These images shown during the trial of a group of men accused of carrying out the daring raid. You may well remember this story. It is now the trial. Sky Shaman Freeman Powell has been following it. And it is quite the tale, Shaman.
It is quite the tale, yes. This fully plumbed and fully functioning golden toilet had been on display at Blenheim Palace for just 2 days before thieves, which are captured in this CCTV footage, were able to break inside the palace and steal it. Now, in this CCTV footage, you can see 2 cars making their way through the gates of Blenheim Palace, tearing across the lawn before pulling up outside. At that point, you can see 3 men exiting the vehicles, handing each other sledgehammers, which the prosecution claims were used in order to break through the window of the palace in order to steal this golden toilet. SJ, it only took 5 minutes for all of this to unravel. And you can see in the CCTV images, which we've just shown, one of the men clutching the golden toilet seat before throwing it into the back of the car. Now, it's quite remarkable, not only because this is an 18-carat gold toilet worth around £4.8 million, but it was fully plumbed as well, which means water could have been pouring out of the pipes. It could have been quite a messy job. Now, the men in this video got away, but the prosecution claims that they did leave evidence behind. The sledgehammers, which were used to smash through the windows of Blenheim Palace, were found at the scene. And today, jurors were also played WhatsApp messages, allegedly exchanges of the men discussing how to sell this gold toilet on and how much for. Now, within days, the prosecution also claims that these men were able to make contact with a Hatton Garden jeweller in order to facilitate this sale. Now, the three men on trial all deny the charges against them. You have Michael Jones from Oxford, who denies stealing the toilet. Frederick Doe and Bora Gutchuk from West London denies any involvement in selling it on as well, whilst James Sheen has previously pleaded guilty to burglary. As for the toilet, well, the prosecution believes that it was likely broken down into small gold nuggets before being sold on.
Definitely one of the more bizarre trials we've covered here on Sky News. I think it's safe to say that. OK, Shimon, thank you very much, Shimon Freeman-Powell, covering that story for us. Still to come on the programme tonight, why fishing is reeling in more and more young people. And the British tennis star Emma Raducanu is offered extra security at next week's Indian Wells after being targeted by a stalker in Dubai.
I'm Stephen Murphy and I'm Sky's Ireland correspondent based here in Dublin.
All alcohol products, not just wine, will have labels warning of liver disease and the link to fatal cancers.
Is it crazy? It's an industry worth around €14 billion a year. That's why Italy sees this Irish plan as such a threat. It's always instructive and occasionally entertaining to hear what Donald Trump has to say on the issue of Brexit.
She's got her own way of doing it, that's okay.
The job takes me to every corner of this island.
The rioting stemmed from a horrific daytime stabbing attack at a primary school in the city centre.
The scale of the rioting and the destruction it caused is pretty much unprecedented here in Dublin. Jerry, any comment on the judge's decisions? Do you feel vindicated, Jerry? This is the end, the somewhat chaotic end, of a 52-day trial.
Micheál Martin could be set to head back to government with the Taoiseach Simon Harris.
Are you confident that you can now return as Taoiseach?
I'm cautiously optimistic and excited.
A mystery press conference hastily called. Leo Varadkar strode out and didn't disappoint.
I am resigning as President and Leader of Fine Gael effective today.
The people here sometimes feel they're somewhat neglected by the Irish government, to the extent that this place is sometimes known as the Forgotten County.
The waters of Ireland and Britain should be home to great white sharks, but none have ever been found.
If there are great white sharks in this area, there's no reason they wouldn't come here to feed. It's basically a buffet on a beach. This could be not only a record-breaking storm, but potentially the most dangerous storm ever to hit Ireland. Sky News, get the full story first.
There's always more to the news than a headline. We want to discover, to delve a little deeper, to find out what's really going on. Explanation, analysis, the people at the heart of every story. I'm Neil Patterson, and this is the Sky News Daily Podcast. So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better. Available wherever you get your podcasts.
Hello, welcome back. Some more breaking news with regard to Ukraine. This is coming from the Reuters news agency. Two sources confirming to Reuters that President Zelensky of Ukraine is planning to travel to Washington on Friday to meet President Trump. We brought you news earlier of a potential mineral deal between the two countries. President Trump saying earlier today that he did plan to meet Zelensky either this week or next, but it seems that President Zelensky is heading to Washington to meet President Trump on Friday. We'll have more on that breaking news coming up for you at 9 o'clock with Yalda Hakim in The World. That follows us here tonight. Right, let's take a look at the sports news now. Teddy is here, and we're talking about Emma Raducanu, her next tournament coming up. And given what happened in her last tournament in Dubai, she's having extra security. Tell me more.
Been offered that, yeah. Not sure if she's confirmed to play yet at Indian Wells in California, but we had these distressing scenes at Dubai Tennis Championships against Karina Mukova in the second round, where we saw her kind of hiding behind the actual umpire's chair at one point due to the exhibited fixated behaviour of a man who'd approached her. She recognised him from previous tournaments. Her childhood coach has since said that this man had followed her from Dubai to Singapore, Abu Dhabi and Doha before that. Raducanu ended up losing that match, but obviously there'll be concerns. She's posted on social media saying she will be OK. We're not yet confirmed that she will play in this big tournament, one of the big tournaments outside of the Grand Slams in California this first part of next week. But they are going to offer 5 extra security guards. There's usually 1 guard to accompany the tennis players as they go out. There'll be 5 extra security guards under the stewardship of Bob Campbell, who's a former Secret Service agent who worked under Bill Clinton in his American presidency before switching to sports security.
OK, really concerning for Emma Raducanu, affecting her game. In terms of tennis, how's she doing? What's next for her? Because that's really what she'll want to be concentrating on.
Yes, 61 in the world currently. Difficult run, of course, won at 18 years of age, the US Open. It was a mercurial run, magical run, wasn't it, in the autumn of 2021, late summer. But she's been in difficult form. Dubai was the only time in recent tournaments she's reached the second round, but she could go in Indian Wells. Then it'll be from the American hard courts to Florida and then back to the clay court in Europe ahead of the French Open and maybe late summer Wimbledon and the US Open to follow. Hope she can repeat that. But it does, I think Jonathan Overend, the tennis commentator, did say that it underscores the fact that there are things that perhaps when we analyse a game that we're not aware of when we watch all these athletes.
Yeah, things going on behind the scenes. OK, Teddy, thank you.
Thank you very much. That's the tennis with Emma Raducanu and football news to come.
Staying connected is vital for business. Sky Business sponsors this report.
I needed someone to look over my plans, so I went to a man who's got plenty of experience working behind the scenes in football.
What is it you think these mentors would bring? Do you think that's going to be a difficult role? Do you think the families or the players will want to hear it?
A lot of educational people coming out of college, coming out of university are going into the system. And I have nothing against that, but that leaves a massive void of experienced ex-professional players. If you look at Sir Alex Ferguson, Ancelotti, Guardiola, Harry Redknapp, they talk about the mentors in their life. Former players will understand the difficulties that these kids will find at the back end of their time in the academy.
So playing that back, people who've had experience of what it's like when you don't make it would be able to help people through that experience. I think that makes sense. What would the mentors encourage these kids to do?
The mentor can be, that little bit of glue between the football club and the families. Parents give up a hell of a lot, Richard, to help the kid get to where he wants to get. And a lot of the times they are as disappointed, if not more disappointed, than what the kids are when they're released.
How many
Sky Business sponsors this report.
Now, it might not seem like a young person's game, but fishing is being given a modern makeover by social media stars and influencers. According to the Angling Trust, thousands of young people have been reeled in by the sport in recent years, drawn to the riverbank and the rod for fishing's anxiety-busting effects. Well, let's talk about this in a bit more detail now, shall we? Founder of Tackling Minds, David Lyons, joins me. His charity helps people who are struggling with their mental health to get into fishing. David, good to see you tonight. Have you noticed this sudden rush to the sport from young people?
Yeah, predominantly over the last few years, really. A number of reasons, the mental health benefits are so widely spoken about now, and there's lots of evidence to say about the mental health and well-being benefits for fishing as well. But also it's, kids who spend, or young people, I should say, who spend a lot of time scrolling through their phones. It's an opportunity for them to now connect with nature. But on the other side as well, there's so many influencers, the likes of Phil Foden, all the social media influencers, and kids are cottoning onto that and wanting to take up the sport as well.
Yeah, the irony, trying to get people off their phones, yet they're posting about it on social media. I was actually just scrolling through Instagram myself. There's even a hashtag Girls Who Fish. Talk to me about the benefits of fishing and what the young people are getting from it.
Yeah, again, with the organisation around Tackling Minds, it's something that we see on a regular basis, both with young people and adults as well. But, it's, getting them out into nature. As I say, there's so many mental health and wellbeing benefits linked to that now, but also the social connection side. It's not only that, it's teaching these young people a new skill, a new hobby, and it's something that, has got to stick with them, create memories that'll stick with them for the rest of their lives as well.
Yeah. Is it a chance to talk as well? Because I know, you know, if you're trying to talk to young people, they always say talk to them in the car because they're not talking directly at you, and it tends to open up a conversation more because it doesn't feel as intrusive. Do you get that with fishing? Because it's a different environment. You sat side by side on the boxes with a rod in your hand. Does it spark conversation?
Yeah, and that's one of the great things about fishing on what magic does happen on the bank. And it opens up conversations because you're not necessarily making eye contact with people, you're concentrating on your float, you've got beautiful surroundings. Yeah, so it just makes people relax and makes conversations really informal. People tend to open up on just hours of conversations. And again, it's something we see on a regular basis with the organisation.
Yeah, just saw a picture of you there with Bob Mortimer, of course, his fishing programme, bringing a whole new audience to fishing. Is it easy to access? Because, of course, we're not just talking about the environment in terms of is it easy to get to a fishing lake or a local river, but we're talking about equipment and stuff like that as well. Sort of how expensive is it? How easy is it for young people to get into it?
This day and age, very easy, it's very accessible. And not only is tackle extremely cheap, but you've got the likes of organisations like Tackling Minds and a number of other organisations up and down the country with similar initiatives, making fishing accessible and removing the price of getting involved. But not only that, the Angling Trust, the governing body, fantastic organisation. If you look at the Get Fishing scheme they have got set up on their website, there's hundreds of free fishing events, and these are great opportunities just to bring your family down, introduce your sons, your daughters, and again, it's just teaching them a skill, a hobby that's got to stick with them for the rest of their lives.
And there's still that bit of competitiveness, isn't there? Because it's all about the picture at the end, isn't it, with a catch?
Of course, it's all about the picture, without a shadow of a doubt.
David, so good to talk to you. David Lyons there, founder of Tackling Minds, talking about the rise in popularity of fishing amongst young people. Let's just recap that breaking news. President Zelensky of Ukraine, Reuters news agency, reporting that he is heading to Washington to visit the White House and President Trump on Friday. Yalda Hakeem will have more on that after the break in the world. We'll see you tomorrow night at 8.